I feel like before we bring folks up, I already feel like we're in this may be a to be continued kind of thing. It seems like there's a lot to talk about in this space, and it's pretty fluid. There's more than just this one topic to talk about. I want you guys to put your seatbelts on, because if you have never sat in a conversation or been a part of a conversation with Xavier, you are going to prepare yourself. The other folks on the panel, I'm not going to introduce because, and I'm also not even going to introduce Xavier, because if you haven't been to a City Club event before, you don't know this, but I don't read bios because I feel like we all learned to read them in 4th and 5th grade, and you can go to the website and you can read them yourself. So I could say a whole lot about X. I could talk about his diversity, no pun intended, about how many different things that he can get off into. He is literally one of my favorite people to sit and talk about things with. And while I may be more senior than him, I learn from him every time we have a conversation. So without further ado, I think I've introduced everybody that I needed to talk about today. I'm going to bring up Xavier Ramey. Okay, they all have water, but you don't. Okay.
We're all sitting down.
Okay, and there's another mic there.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing? Great, okay, and shout out to Harris School of Public Policy. So my name is Xavier Ramey. I'm from the best side of Chicago, the west side of Chicago. I'm always gonna represent. Every time. Dion, you know you got products going out to the west side too. We're gonna have you up on stage very shortly. I'm very excited to be here with you all today. My name is Xavier Ramey. I'm the founder and chief executive officer of a social impact consulting firm called Justice Informed. We're based here in Chicago, but we work across the country, driving innovative solutions for organizational design and relational repair. My firm belief is that when we look at the questions of injustice and inequity, we are looking at an issue of design. In many ways, people think that we're talking about the values that some people have. And of course, values can drive the question of whether we have equity in a city, or whether we have justice in our criminal justice system, or whether we have equality in our communities. But the reality is that we also design for injustice. The way that we build our companies, the way that we design our cities, the way the zoning departments and planning departments work together, and appraisers and brokers and realtors and all these types of folks come together and either communicate or don't, can produce the outcomes that we see in society. The reality is that we all have an opportunity today to do what time has not afforded many people, which is to have the space, the privilege, the resources, and the conviction to change the opportunities for the better for people who are not voiceless. I want to quote Arundhati Roy when she says quite often that there's no such thing as people who are voiceless. There are people who are intentionally suppressed or preferably unheard. And that is the reality of our time. Is we want to give space and place for voice. We want to use the City Club as a platform today to ensure that people who represent the intentions, the lives, and the needs of people all across this great city of Chicago are able to find their space and find their voice with an accurate representation of who they are and what they need. I hope that you all listen to this conversation today with an amount of civic generosity, with a level of emotional preparedness and psychological readiness, because the work of equity is fundamentally about repair. So we're not just going to be talking about making investments. And I know we're here to talk about philanthropy. We're not just here to talk about philanthropy. We're here also to talk about why philanthropy is necessary. As the great Martin Luther King said, it is commendable for the philanthropists to give, but it cannot excuse them from thinking about the root cause issues that create the need for philanthropy. And so we'll be talking a bit about root causes. As a person who's spent the last 10 or 15 years in the social impact sector, I have a lot to say about this issue. But fortunately, y'all don't have to hear from me. We're going to hear from three wonderful leaders in their own right to unpack these types of issues. But I just want to say that when you walk away from this conversation, I want to just prepare you a little bit for what I hope you take away from this conversation, though I hope that you have a heart of curiosity coming into this conversation about how do we eat? How do we get more? How do we create stability? How do we have better design mechanics for the ways in which we envision and implement the work of justice and equity? But I also hope that when you leave here, you don't think about what is the philanthropist to do. I hope you think about what is yours to do. There's not one person in here who has a lack of agency sufficient such that they cannot make a change in this great city. Every single person here has the opportunity, as do I. And so I invite you in. I don't declare that you have to come in, but I do invite you into the work, an urgent pace and path for the work of equity and justice, not just in Chicago, but because we are in many ways an example for the rest of the country. What can happen here can happen anywhere. And so if we love each other more deeply, more accurately, love will permeate throughout the country. If we insist on not doing so, if we insist on the river norths of Chicago existing and the North Lawndale and Garfield Parks where my family came from and lived since 1923, then we'll continue to have the state of the city that we see. So with that said, thank you. Y'all gonna see a little bit of culture up here too. I just wanna be very, very clear about that. Y'all gonna see some culture up here. My vibe, I always tell people when we're talking with justice-informed clients or if I'm talking to my friends, the vibe is gonna be a professional cookout. I'm serious about that. I'm serious about that. And only a couple of y'all gonna make the greens. And some of y'all can't make the potato salad. I'm not gonna name no names. But with that said, I would love to welcome up, and you'll hear from them to introduce themselves, Dion Dawson. Please come on up, brother. Good to see you. Come on. You good? All right, we're gonna keep it moving. Jamal Cannon. And Ashley Munson. All right, so folks, I'm gonna grab a seat with you all as soon as Ashley's up here. Take your time, sister, it's all good. We will certainly wait. Black women put in a lot of work.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
There we go.
I'm gonna ask you all to take 2 minutes to introduce yourselves. Tell us a bit about who you are, what brought you to the work, and what do people need to know about the work your institution is doing?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. I'm going to try to act like I'm not the talkative guy that I am. Dion Dawson, I am the founder and chief dreamer of Dion Chicago Dream. I want to acknowledge that I say chief dreamer because when we're talking about historically Black-led orgs, we don't get to have the cool names. So I wanted to make sure that just like at Meta or Twitter, you know, they have like Chief Blockhead and all of that. I'm like, okay, I have to get something cool. But what we do at Dion Chicago Dream is we fight food insecurity through last mile delivery and logistics. And what we mean by that is we ultimately wanted to shorten the time frame between fresh produce being somewhere and ultimately being in the home of those people who need it. And so what we've been able to do in 3 years, we've been able to provide 500,000 pounds of fresh produce to more than 20,000 families. We've been able to create 21 jobs paying at least $20 an hour. We've been able to raise millions of dollars, be debt free, and also try to oh yeah, we can snap on that. We got some fundraisers in this room, so listen, y'all know the fundraisers
right.
know. But more importantly, bring the innovation and advancement that we see outside of philanthropy and outside of food distribution into philanthropy and really get closer to where we want to be in terms of meeting critical needs and making sure that we can, you know, when we lay our heads down at night, that we're actually meeting that mission that we've committed ourselves to. And I thank everybody for being here.
Thank you. Jamyle.
I'm Jamal Cannon. I'm founder and executive director of The Block. And I started with the question of what should we do with kids who fight? And our response as a city so far has been to put them in jail, keep them away from other kids, and exclude them from the resources and opportunities that I think all young people deserve. And it hasn't worked. So I started a boxing club as a teacher that started off with 12 kids and grew to 120 until we got shut down for being too big for kids walking to our organization. We not only provide the sport of boxing, but we assess every young person on 3 levels. It's academic, social, emotional, and physical. And they work with youth development professionals to reach holistic goals within the organization. Now, through that, we learned that there were needs in the community that should be met so that they could reach their full potential. So from food security to health clinics, we started partnering with our community to do more to support the space that we expect our kids to grow. So at The Block, you'll find the hardest boxing training in young people's lives, along with academic support, community resources, events like haunted houses and pet food deliveries with One Tail at a Time through our partnerships. And we're working hard to meet kids where they are, to help them get to where they want to be, and it's working. So every kid in our program has graduated high school and been accepted into college since 2016. With an average GPA of 3.3.
Oof. Okay.
So listening to our community, finding the needs that needs to be met, and working with others to help meet those needs so that we can help create a better Chicago.
That's amazing. Hey, everyone. My name's Ashley Munson. By day, I am manager of community engagement and government affairs at the Obama Foundation. Basically, what that means is working across the city, south, west, north, to build relationships, sustainable relationships, but also prepare folks for the center that is coming in October 2025. I've been there since the top of this year, so that's by day. At night, I do a lot of things, actually. And so one of those, I can start by saying, when George Floyd was murdered in 2020, I put on one of the largest marches in the city. The biggest difference of the march that we led to Daley Plaza and only had over 4,000 people come through was that we had an agenda. We had 5 agenda items. Most of those agenda items got put into the Black Caucus pillars when they passed them. But our biggest effort was making Juneteenth a local, state, and national holiday. So that is what we did. We were a small part of that, but we definitely did our part for the years forthcoming in building that capacity. I would say the other thing that I would mention, I have a show called Today with Munson. The goal is to civically engage the culture. I've coined the term from the liaison from the streets to the State House. So my goal is to break down everyday matters for folks to understand political things. And my previous shows have included Congressman Delia Ramirez, Alderman Lamont Robinson, Jeanette Taylor, and a few comedy acts. But the goal of that show is to really break down government because it wasn't made for people that look like me. So our goal is to help people become better advocates in their community, to everything that X said, to make our communities better and filled with more resources.
So I want to frame up this conversation a little bit. We all know that charitable giving is an important part of financial stability for nonprofit organizations and any type of real social work. Today, we really want to focus on the question of charitable giving that is from the foundation side, the corporate side, and the individual side. Those are the sort of 3 largest areas of giving. Of course, bequests. So when a person dies and they leave a trust, in honor of their name or in service of an organization. Sometimes that is also part of it. But I just want to say that what we're talking about today is the question of how those big 3, foundations, corporations, and individuals, and just to give a little bit of data, individuals account for nearly 67% of all giving. They are the largest segment of givers. I know that many people think that foundations or corporations are the largest, but it's about 67% that are just coming from individuals. When you think about the foundations, they account for roughly about 17% of all national giving. And when we're talking about corporations, they account for about 4% of all giving. These numbers are accurate as of 2021. Last year in Giving USA, if you all Google Giving USA, they produce an annual report that really crystallizes the question of how has charitable giving increased or decreased, and how was it diversified in the last year. Their report just came out 2 days ago. You all can find that online. But one of the things that was really challenging about their report is that they identified that for only the 4th time in 4 decades, charitable giving went down in 2022. It went down by 3.4%, which adjusted for inflation is roughly 10.5%. That is a massive shock to the system for any organization. If you can imagine a company losing 10% of its revenues or its funding streams in a year, that is a massive shock to the system. And so these are 3 leaders who are working to ensure that despite these odds, the work still gets done. But we really want to unpack the question of what do you feel is the issue? Where does your organization come into it? And what does it mean for us to eat? What does it mean for us to eat? So the first question, I gave a couple data points, but I want you all in your line of work, in your area, and thinking about your ultimate client, your viewpoint. What is the data point that you want people to really think about that crystallizes the urgency of your work? Ashley, can we start with you?
Oh, wow.
On behalf of the Obama Foundation. What would President and First Lady Barack Obama say?
To be clear, I'm speaking on behalf of Ashley. So the Chicago Urban League dropped a report at the top of this month, the State of Black Chicago 2023. I encourage everyone in this room to read it. It's very interesting. But according to the report, about 85,000 Black residents have left the city between I think it was over the span of 12 years. Now, that sounds like numbers for all of us, but let me put that in a little bit of context. Inglewood had about 100,000 residents in about 2021, or prior to 2021. But at 2021, they have 22,000 residents. And we know what happens when people leave a city. Not only does that city, that town suffer, but the surrounding areas suffer, meaning that Chicago is only as best as the neighborhoods they invest in. I digress. Second point, I am from the 34th ward, the prior one, the one that had Pullman, Roseland, and I'm from Morgan Park. We are no longer a ward. I'm a part of the 21st ward, where my alderman is Alderman Ronnie Mosley. My ward is now in the West Loop. And so the reason for that is because we lost the most people due to in the last sentence of people in the city, meaning resources are gone and all of that. And I say that because I know people leave neighborhoods for different reasons, right? Better schooling, better jobs, even if they have to leave out the state. But we don't talk about the issues they are leaving for. In addition, not only are the problems they left for not being addressed, but the problems that are left for the residents that are still there. The report surmises and basically says that schools in Black neighborhoods will continue to underperform, local businesses will continue to close, and neighborhoods of Black residents, they will continue to be pushed out if those inequities aren't addressed. And so I think that gives us a kind of precedent for this conversation. And my client, I'm a little bit different than these rock stars here. They are in the city doing their thing with the nonprofit. I've been lobbying and being an activist for the past 8 to 10 years. Charter School Network, the Greater Chicago Food Depository, Illinois Environmental Council. So that's environmental justice, that's food insecurity, and that's Black and brown education. But I think it's important that we talk about the resources that all of us need, right? If we don't invest in those resources, Chicago can potentially look like another Detroit. If we don't invest in those resources, there won't be resources to feed people or have programming. We need those resources all across the board, no matter what you look like. So I think it's important to start with that kind of context to talk about how can we make sure that everyone has the right to eat?
And I want to build off of that, Ashley, because you mentioned the need for targeted resources to the communities that we're seeing people leaving from. Xavier spoke about the 10% decrease in philanthropic giving. Where do you think that decrease is coming the most from?
Yeah,
It's going to come from the communities that are being most impacted by these cycles. Now, there was a study by Echo and Green and Bridgespan that found that Black-led nonprofits get 76% fewer unrestricted assets than white-led nonprofits. What that means is that while we can all say that best solutions come from the community, we still don't trust the leaders within that community to lead and make decisions for the community. They're being made by funders that are restricting access to certain programs. So, I think a part of this is so much of what we look for in philanthropy is not a marker of programmatic success or quality, but a marker of your connection to resources. Absolutely. And your connection to resources in this city, in this country, is often tied to your proximity to whiteness. So when I'm being asked to have specific usage of words in my grant, or have the right headshot, or all of the things that come along with, like, who else is funding me? When you're asking who else is funding an organization, you're seeing what access to resources does this organization have, and that by a product of that system that we have is more indicative of a connection to resources and a connection to whiteness than programmatic quality.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then, I mean, when we talk about eating, for me, I can simplify it and say that it allows us, or me and my organization, to be seen and thus see everything else. And what I mean by that is when we're eating, when we're properly funded, then you have strategy. Then there's no fight or flight. And so for our organization, it's understanding what the landscape looks like. Whenever a few of the people in this room who I've shared a conversation with before, a few funders, a few partners, we talk about the facts. We talk about, for example, with Dion Chicago Dream and food distribution in the state, the market cap is $400 million. And of that $400 million, 97% goes to 4 organizations. So when we talk about eating and we talk about, being seen and wanting to see, it's understanding what am I up against as a fundraiser, as a leader, and as a member of this sector, and then ultimately putting it in the face of everyone who tells me that I'm too passionate. Who tells me that I should not be pissed off, who tells me that I should just be okay with what we've built. But we're fighting something, and we're talking about eating in a sense where when you talk about Black leaders, when you talk about Black founders, we have the least amount of multi-year giving out of all of our contemporaries. And so let's put that in perspective. I have an organization that grew from year 1 to year 2, 1,400%, from year 2 to year 3, 364%, and year 3 going into to year 4, we're gonna grow another 65%. All the while being a debt-free organization, all the while employing members of our community, all the while doing everything we could to bring that innovation into the sector, only to then look at data, look at reports that tell us things that we already know. But what I always think about when it's time to talk about eating or being adequately funded is I think about the resources we spend on identifying the problem versus the resources we spend on addressing the problem. Now we can have, we gonna take that clap. We gonna take it. We gonna take it. Okay, we gonna take it. And so when we're talking about this, understanding that it is not insufficient to spend $2 million on a report if you spent more than $2 million addressing what the problem was in the report. Sure. And so what we want to make sure we're doing when we're talking about eating is at the most basic level is Philanthropy, Chicago, and the United States as a whole. We have to hold ourselves accountable to what is working, and whatever is not working, figure out how little by little we can start being more efficient and more accountable.
Sure.
Come on now.
Come on. So anybody who doesn't like fast talking, I'm very sorry today. Anyone who's not keeping up, my apologies. We're gonna keep this moving at full speed. One thing that I think is important to pull out is the cultural significance of the word eat. So you all saw this in the title of this program when you all were registering for it. The ability to eat, Dion and I were talking about this last week. So much of the work of being a Black leader specifically has to do not just with, do you know the mechanics of running an organization? Are you able to do the fundraising, these things? But there's a real joy in expressing culturally who we are as we do it. And so for those who aren't aware and aren't accustomed to the term eating, it basically just, for example, if you just get a $100,000 grant, you've been working on this thing for months and months and months, and Dion says, X, I just got this grant. I'm like, man, you eating tonight? You eating? We eating. We eat. It's time to eat. Yeah. You may be in for instance, in my sector, we do a lot of work with diversity, equity, inclusion. We launch organizational assessments. We stand up new strategies. We coach executive teams from Fortune 500s down to small startups. And we are in right now a racial equity and DEI recession. So I would say we ain't eating. At all. We ain't eating. At all. It's hard out here for anyone who cares about this type of work. This is what eating means. It doesn't just mean the question of provision and resource. It is a question of the availability of it. Sure. The availability of these resources. And to your point, Dion, you said, of the $400 million market cap, 96% goes to how many organizations? 4 organizations. This is part of the challenge. The rest of that is left for everyone else to eat from. When we think about investments, I run a for-profit company. The reality is that only 7% of all global non-institutional funding, venture capital, these sorts of things, goes to people of color, women, LGBTQ folks combined. The rest goes to the ideas of white men. 93% of all global capital. We're not eating. We're not eating. We're not eating. We're left to split and fight in some ways about this pie. And so this requires a certain flexibility and acrobaticness in our leadership, right? So I'd love for y'all to share some examples of how you all think outside the box. So What is something you've seen across the sector that's allowed you to do something different and build momentum? Right, something sort of outside the box. And I'll give one example. So the African American Alliance of CDFI CEOs, some of you all may not be aware of them. They're a national organization that's committed to bringing specifically African American executives together who are running CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions. Justice Informed was fortunate enough to be the organization that helped to create that institution, to launch it, to write its mission paper, to organize their board and these sorts of things. But what came from that when a bunch of Black executives got together was they knew that the funding was challenging. They knew that they didn't have a lot of succession planning. But when they looked at the reality of having all these massive CDFIs that might have billion-dollar balance sheets and assets under management down to some that just had 1 million, what they realized was, how do we help each other to grow? Because the big ones had some special sauce that they had figured out. They'd figured something out, but if there's not an apparatus to keep that communication going, then they'll never share those best practices. And it was actually through new market tax credits. They realized a lot of the larger organizations had grown in bringing in these types of financial products to grow their balance sheets, increase their ability to do capital investments in communities where Black and brown people were residing, where their banks had a requirement to lend. These sorts of things. So I know y'all are creative and acrobatic and always partnering. Can you all give us an example in your area of work where there's something that's non-traditional that you pursued, that worked, that created traction and momentum for your cause?
I love to start. When I mentioned our nonprofit's mission, I talked about cultivating a love of boxing to provide resources and opportunities for our community. And Dion mentioned there are reports, $2 million reports that get written up about what it is that a certain community needs. We will never need a $2 million report because I can go down the street and ask Ms. Scott, right? So when I meet somebody on the street and they're telling me, hey, we need X, Y, and Z. Hey, we have our kids in virtual learning and it's not going well for us. What can you do? Okay, we can start a virtual learning lab. It didn't take us canvassing the entire community. We're in a position where we can listen and respond immediately. And because of that, we can move a lot more quickly because it takes me talking to a neighbor, hearing from our kids, using the relationships that we've built to provide the resources that they're asking for instead of descending on our community with resources that we have.
Absolutely.
That's good.
Come on. I think I have to tell a story. So early on when we started, a little bit about our organization, we don't take donated food at all. And I'll tell you where it stemmed from. It was a happy accident. We're right at the docks. I'm talking to Jab Produce, who's our supplier. We don't have any money yet. We didn't start our programming. And he's walking me through the docks, and he says, well, if you want food, you can come here on Friday like the other groups that come. And whatever these companies have left, we give it to them for free. And then he used an example that it always sticks with me. I always, talk to my partners, my team about it. He says, a group came last week and got 3,000 pounds of broccoli. But then he muttered under his breath, and I caught it. He said, well, this week they don't have anything. And that was the moment where I said, okay, I'm confronted with this fact. Now, traditionally in the sector, you just take what you can get. I decided not to because I realized the very thing that our residents need is consistent access. And so if we're going to enter into this market, we can't push the same thing that is being pushed, which is we don't know what to do. We're not built like that. And so that early line setting allowed us to, no matter what, never cross the line of hoping we got something and actually building retail activity to the point where we've never owed them a penny. We're one of their biggest clients. But also now they're attached to our organization in a way where, in our first 3 years, everyone has seen us on the news, on Ellen. You would see a photo of Dion with a white box. Well, that was Jab Produce's box. So we gave that company 7 million TV, print, and radio impressions for free on a national scale. that was the trade-off. And so we built that value by drawing that line, and now that quality is attached to our brand, so that when they see branded sprinters, when they see branded box, when they see that logo on our team members' chest, the one thing that is never questioned is the quality that is involved.
That's good stuff. I don't need to answer after that.
Don't do that. Don't do that. It's the cookout. Don't be messy. Don't be messy.
You all seem like some principled leaders. You all seem that you move, you seem like people who move with conviction. And one of the challenges of the work of fundraising and creating and finding resources is similar to what you said. You got to take what you can get.
I'd be happy.
You're often asked to take what you can get.
Yeah.
And in that, there's a term, I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with it, it's called mission creep. Scope creep is what we say in the consulting world. But mission creep is where you're doing something that you know is not necessarily aligned with what the point of your organization is or even what your values are. But in order to get the resources, you're going to have to compromise. There's a master class out by a man named Chris Voss. Chris Voss is a hostage negotiator, and he famously said in his book, Never Split the Difference, I have to always negotiate, but I can't compromise. I can't get half a body back.
That's the bar.
I need the whole body.
That's good.
And somehow you got to walk away thinking and feeling that you got everything you needed. And so there's a question of mastery in the work of negotiation, but there's also a question of how do you hold the line to prevent that mission creep, to prevent that scope creep. And so when we think about these principles and we think about the question of who y'all are here on behalf of, because y'all are sent by some folks. You're not just here as individuals. You're here on behalf of the people who sent you to speak on their behalf. And so what are some of the ways and how do you ensure that your values are upheld through the creation of partnerships or through the funding process? How do you ensure that your principles stay alive? And are there examples where you've had to negotiate without compromise?
Ashley.
Ashley, go ahead, Ashley.
I appreciate it. That's really nice.
I didn't even know she wanted to go.
That's crazy. Wow, that's crazy. That's crazy.
Please.
I was thinking on which way to answer that question as an activist lobbyist or somebody a part of a nonprofit. And I'll say if I can combine those two, I think my whole trajectory has been being a part of nonprofits, passing bills. By trade, I'm a lobbyist. You give me a bill, I'm gonna pass it. But there's a point where you have to pass a bill that you don't believe in. Or you have to come home to a constituency that this doesn't better people that look like me, so why am I doing it? On the other side of that, when we were raising money for the march, the first year we raised $11,000. Also, we did it in 11 days and had 4,000 people come out. The second year was a little bit more planned, a little bit more stressful, because to the point that somebody made earlier, Black folks in specific, we got to learn how to collaborate and be better with that. But I digress again. The second year we raised $31,000, and it was because I had a set of non-negotiables. I didn't want your money just so you can get a mic. I wanted your money so we can help Juneteenth become a national, state, and local holiday, and so we can create a Black agenda, which is on my next to do. So I think, in combination, I think I stood true to who I am, if that meant leaving an organization because you wanted me as the token Black person, instead of actually doing the work and building relationships, because that's what I do in my sleep. And then secondly, it's remaining true to who I am, and which is why I'm at the Obama Foundation. I think, it's a lot of stuff that can be said about the construction and everything that's happening, but it's a lot of stuff we're working on to make sure that the community is heard. This isn't a normal presidential center. This is a center that will be made by the community for the community, with people having access that they didn't traditionally have at libraries. So I think it's a part of standing my ground and using my faith. I'm a Christian, believe in God, the Lord is kind. Using that as a way to solidify who I am and to do the work and connect with folks like y'all.
Can I just jump in? Ashley, we got to gas you up. You said very casually, the march.
Yeah,
Very
the march.
casually.
Like that.
Like it was no big deal. You've put some of this city's need for recognition of Black people on your shoulders. I would love for you to share what was the march and what was the work that you were pushing forward where you said, hey, we're not compromising.
Okay, so George Floyd was murdered. The beginning of it, I was on Twitter and it was folks talking about let's just burn it all down, which depending on the day. May or may not disagree. I'll stop there. But I was upset because I'm in Morgan Park, closer to Roseland, and it's a food desert. The closest grocery store to me was a Save-A-Lot. I go to Mariano's, which is in Evergreen Park. And so the Walgreens, like many Walgreens in the city, shut down. But I knew people that had grandmothers that got their medication from Walgreens. So now your grandmother, your auntie, your family has to go all the way to 127th on the bus, if they have transportation or not, to find medicine. Long story, a little bit shorter. Got in some debates, because I like healthy debates. And I took a break from social media for about a few days, came back and said, hey, what if we can find an agenda to march on? Woke up, had like over 20 text messages like, hey, you should do the march. I didn't say me. Hey, I will help, because I love to help. And 11 days later, we had a march with 5 acts. It was a healthcare act about reform in healthcare. It was a few criminal justice pillars in there, and it was Juneteenth becoming a holiday. So after that, we got some of the healthcare, criminal justice reforms in the bills, and then of course, 2-3 years later, we got Juneteenth as a national holiday. But I think for me, the Juneteenth march it was bigger than marching. I think marching is super important, but it's like, what are we marching to and what are we doing next? And so I think the march itself set me up to now think, okay, we need a Black agenda. We need, maybe you agree in charter schools, maybe you agree in public schools, but at the end of the day, Black and brown people deserve better education. It doesn't matter how we get there, we just gotta get there. And so that set me up for a different mindset and put me on different platforms with leaders throughout the nation, because the march got national coverage on CNN and different BET and stuff like that. So I'm grateful for the march, because it set me up to be in these rooms and meet great folks like yourself. But I think the most important thing is it taught me why I'm here on this earth and why connecting with people like you guys in this room too, and helping people understand what the right to eat means.
Let's go.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Dion, Jamyle, anything about negotiating without compromise?
I'm not talking after you, so.
Jamyle's up first.
Let's go. Hey, it's important not to compromise on our values. And I think a lot of my perspective on this comes from me not being from Chicago originally, and recognizing that I am working on the west side of Chicago, a place that I can't accurately represent. So I'm not gonna speak about the west side of Chicago in a way that a kid on the west side of Chicago or a parent on the west side of Chicago wouldn't want me to speak.
That's right.
I hear so often people get into rooms like this and speak about the kids they work with in their community in ways that they would never say to their faces.
Yeah.
And I know that people are bending because they think that's what philanthropy wants to hear. And honestly, it's often what philanthropy wants to hear. They want to hear this hopeless narrative. They want to hear about downtrodden people that you've lifted up because you're a savior of the community. And I cannot bring myself to do it. And I think when I ensure that I speak that way and I demand that other people around me speak that way, that naturally filters out people that I don't want to work with. Mm-hmm. So, because if you come to me and you say, like, I have a program for at-risk youth, that's a term we use a lot, right? Mm-hmm. Nobody's thinking about it. Or even disadvantage or anything that negatively describes a young person, we are already putting a cap on, actually, we're already putting the floor on what we think is acceptable for those people, right? Mm-hmm. The resources that you think is acceptable for an at-risk young person are completely different from the resources you think are acceptable from an aspirational young person, a motivated young person. If I can provide the bare minimum to people that we consider disadvantaged or at risk and be heralded as a hero. And I need to be held to a higher standard. So when I'm speaking about young people, when young people come to me, they're being motivated, they're being driven, they're being intelligent. They're coming to me because they want something for their lives, and I'm going to describe them as such. And when I'm speaking that way, I think I naturally attract the people who see the community as powerful and worthy and not in need of fixing, but just in need of the resources that they can provide. So we'll not compromise on that. And I believe that that brings the right people to me.
Absolutely.
I call first.
Man, I gotta go after the march and him. It is a lot, okay? Negotiating without compromise. Just building a little bit off what Jamyle touched on, I am extremely appreciative of everyone in this room. Anyone out there watching, anyone that will see this video or hear about this panel, but I do not answer to any of you. And I remind myself of it every day.
That's true.
I I answer to the people we serve, the team that got us here.
That's right.
And my family that allows me to put most of my bandwidth into something that I was never formally trained for. And so when we're talking about negotiating, I treat it like a hostage situation every day. When I get going, Sarah from the Black Hogs, Sarah from Amazon, like you guys know, because we're talking about negotiation where historically access to our people has been sold to the highest bidder.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is that we never really know our price. So when we go back to our team, when we're explaining it, it's almost like a comedy bit where we go back to the team and they say, well, how much did you get? I'm like, I got $10. Like, that's it? And you start thinking like, wait, did I not get enough? And so when we're talking about negotiating without compromise, of course I can easily, talk about, food and the freshness of it. But I really want to say that it always goes back to the team and the culture that we're building. And I think it's important that we speak on this. I am so much more excited about my team than I am of myself. And people think because I have a comms background and because I've done interviews and we've been featured in a lot of places that's the joy that drives me, but it's not. It's actually waking up and having the opportunity to create a C-suite, to actually build a culture where I'm on a Zoom call and I don't turn down their music in our office because that is their environment where that's their safe space. And so, I say that because every day we're always negotiating against how we've been trained and what we need to do to really push the culture and push the sector forward. And so this is less of a one major tentpole moment and more of every day finding those different things that can hold us accountable to really being and doing what we really need to do to be okay with ourselves when we lay our head down at night. And I think that's what the negotiation is about, is that if you lose too much in a negotiation, you're not gonna be okay with yourself.
That's right.
You're gonna lay down and you're gonna stare at the ceiling, you're gonna be like, darn, I didn't get back what I should have got back. Yeah. And for me, for the first time in my life, I have the opportunity to be held accountable so that when I walk in the office, people are looking at me to see if I am still of the same ilk that I presented to them when I convinced them to join this crazy mission with branded sprinters and a box with a big head on it. So
It's pretty big.
It's a pretty big
it's a pretty big head. And everybody is like, oh, that's your head. Yeah, it's a big head.
That Sprinter van that they got?
Yeah.
It's an interesting vehicle.
A lot of primary colors.
A lot of primary colors. So I've only got two more questions. I want to ask the audience. So I know that a lot of you all, it seems like we got a lot of new faces at the City Club today. So one of the things that we always do as a practice is we take questions. But what we're going to ask is there should be some little note cards at your tables. Feel free to grab those note cards. If you have a question, write it down. We're going to try to take one or two questions from the audience. Amanda's going to come around and pick those up. Jackie's gonna help out too. Oh, the chairman is gonna be helping out. All right. But feel free to write those down. I've got one lightning round question for you all, and then one sort of open question, and we wanna take any questions that you all have. So the lightning question is to the emerging organizations or initiatives or leaders, right? The ones who aren't yet on the stage here at the City Club. What advice would you give them? Just one thing that you would say, hey, if you really want to knock it out the park with navigating this Chicago-based funding landscape and partnership landscape, here's what you need to think about to do.
Email us. Email me. Yes, that's the advice. The advice it's about accountability. And I think that, I'm happy that we're here. I think it's important not only for the City Club, but also for us, because I feel we deserve it. And then we're going to bring people back.
What's the email address?
Any of our email addresses, because all of us have been here. And so Dion Chicago Dream at Dion at gmail.com, or Jamal's, what's yours?
J. Cannon at theblockchicago.org.
Ashley Munson.
A. Munson at Obama.org.
And Xavier.
XavierJusticeInformed.com.
Exactly. And so I think that a big piece of advice is understanding it's important that we turn around and share what we're learning. And so now that we've been on this stage, and I was extremely nervous before I got up here, I can turn around and say, okay, hey, Jackie, next time when you're up here, this is what you need to be cognizant of and things like that.
And he means that. He means that 100%. I have a standing meeting with Dion. And we're going over what's happening in our organizations, how can we work together better. We've had a meeting with Jackie where Dion's gotten us all lunch, and I still owe him one. But he absolutely means that because there's so much knowledge to share within each other. I would also say to know who you are and stand firm in that. Because this is an industry where will try to twist you into what they want you to be, and you can lose sight of your mission like that and get all the money in the world. But know who you are so that you can drive the results that you're looking to drive, and go home and lay your head down and feel good about the work that you're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would say that one idea you can't shake, that thing, like you let it go. Like you thought about it last year and then it's back up, or you meet somebody and they bring it up. I feel like you have to pursue that.
Yep.
The caveat to that is that there are a lot of people that are on the ground that may not have a brand as big as some of the folks that we know. They're doing the work, they just need the resources. So it's a mixture of not letting that dream go. I know that sounds lofty or ambitious, but it's true. If you can't let it go, that means you were created to do that thing. Second, I would say find the people doing the work. To Dion's point about accountability, like we will be so much further ahead as a city. Let's not even break it down into race, but as a city, if we worked better together on the ground doing the work.
I got to go again.
Go.
Because if you can't do it, who can? I think a lot of times we're sitting back with that idea and we don't recognize that the people who are out here doing work, there's nothing special about any of us. We just decided we're going to do it and we stayed at it. We failed and we figured it out. We kept getting better. If you can't do it, who can? So understand that you are the person to get that idea done.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
So I'm going to actually move to the two questions we got from the audience. One of them is fairly aligned with the last question I was going to ask anyway. So I'm going to start with that one. This is from Dave Metz. So the question is, the funds sound like they're available. It sounds like there's dollars available, but not accessible to specifically Black-led organizations. What can foundations and corporations do to ensure equitable access to funds, and what requirements need to change or be abolished?
I'm taking it.
I'm taking it
In the application. Come on, y'all. Come on, Dave, wherever you at.
Oh man, listen, I gotta take that one. And I'm gonna give an example, but I had to. Oh my God.
I got a lot of examples on this too.
Okay, cool.
I see the excitement about this question. That's a great question.
Oh, that's a good
question. I'm excited about the answer.
The funds are there in every part of the sector, and they are not accessible, and I'll give an example of why. An example that angered me, and everybody connected with me on LinkedIn knew it, was when Mackenzie Scott, when Yield Giving, they opened up the round of the $1 million grants, right? Now, on the surface, it's like, oh man, we have 250, Black or brown leaders who are gonna get $1 million for their organization. But then immediately when you read the requirements, very few Black leaders who are not traditionally placed in a historical organization could meet them. So for example, you had to have hit 1 million in revenue 2 of the last 3 years in a pandemic, right? Historically, more than 90% of founders and executive directors at the $1 million level are not Black or brown. That is fact. So off top, that takes out the playing field.
Yep.
Then another one is in those 2 or 3 years, you have to have audited financials. Now, I don't know if everyone in here understands an audit is not cheap.
No.
An audit on average is between $12,000 and $15,000. Now, you're talking about a sector that historically is cash poor. You never hear any nonprofit talk about cash on hand, and that is the problem. At our organization, Robert at RP and Associates is our accountant, and if he's not sweating, that means we're in good standing. we try not to run on projections because that's where it gets dangerous. Imagine everyone's financial projections 1 month before the pandemic.
Right.
Nobody hit those numbers. And so now you're talking about not hitting those numbers, not hitting those projections, and then turning around, being cash poor, and having to have a $15,000 audit when you're already not paying your staff and you have like $1,000 in the bank. And then somehow managing to get to 1 million one of those years, have everyone text your phone and say, hey, go to yield giving, only to see that the same systemic issues or barriers that were there just got pushed at the highest degree possible. And so when we talk about, accessibility, everyone in this room, myself included, we're guilty of pushing things not in the legal sense, but in market practice. And that is where we have to change our behaviors. When you're talking about funding, when you're talking about the accessibility, what is in black and white? If it's not there, why are we doing it?
Yep.
But go, because I'll be here for hours.
I'm with it. I have two suggestions, but I want to talk about the most deflating moment that I had in philanthropy. It was, the pandemic wasn't new to us at this point. I had taken the time to write a grant. I'm working 75 hours a week at this point. We had just gotten the building right before the pandemic hit, and we need to get some funds in. Everybody's tightening up on us. So I take some time to write this grant. I get the grant rejection letter, and they addressed me as if I was Jamal Cole. They didn't read that grant. It was like sticking a needle in a balloon for me. Just all the air went out of me, because for me to take the time to do this and for them to see Black leader, first name starts with J, must be Jamal Cole. Yeah. And I called Jamal, he said, we didn't apply for that grant. So to realize that we were immediately cast, immediately. And this is just something that happened within the organization. It made me question how many of my other grant applications had even been read. How many times have I been rejected on site just by my name? I got a pretty Black name, right? So that really made me look at philanthropy in a completely different light. Yeah. And it makes me think about all the points of bias that could come across in the application process, in the funding process. A question that I mentioned earlier, who else funds you? Every grant application I ask me, who else gives you? That is checking my proximity to wealth. That's all that question asks. And if it has any bearing on your funding decisions, then you are infusing a moment of bias into your application process, just like that. If it doesn't have any bearing on your funding decision, it shouldn't be a question. I agree. Right? There are moments like that along the process. A second thing, why has no funder asked me who else they should be funding?
My God.
So you'll look at an application and see, like, this foundation funds them, so they must be good. You're taking their word on it, but you're not taking my word.
That's good.
Second point of bias infused into this process. We have to look at every point in our application process, every point in our funding process, and see what discretion is this given, who can be harmed by this discretion, and what do we need to do about it? Because everybody can say that our funding process is wrong and it's biased, but you point out any individual point and say, oh no, that's perfectly fine. They got a perfectly good explanation for every part of this process, but something's going wrong. So what bias can be in this point of discretion and who's being harmed by it, so we can fix that. Examine your processes, look at every individual point, and understand that bias is going to come into play.
And your name is Black and beautiful.
Period.
Ashley, you want to close this out, or you good?
No, retweet everything they said. Good stuff.
So I'll say that this is not just even just in the nonprofit sector. I'm a small business owner. It's the same in ours. The questions that we get asked as a business, like Justice Informed, we've run on average about a 30% profit margin every year. There's not many businesses in that way. When you think about the city of Chicago, less than 6% of African-American, specifically African-American business owners, just talking LLCs, ever make it to 5 years with more than 3 employees, right? And so knowing that, my company's in that 6%, we have never, ever been awarded any small business grant that we've applied for. We have never won any fellowship program I've ever applied for. Never gotten any institutional support whatsoever. This is the reality, right? You can still be putting up numbers like this. You can still be putting up numbers like 30% margins. You can still be putting up numbers like 7 Black and brown and women, LGBTQ folks hired, jobs, minimum wage of $50,000 a year at my company, right? Like this is the reality, and you still can be seen as not sufficient. And so it begs the question of, then what is sufficiency? Right? Like, what more do you need? These sorts of things. I want to just say that it is so powerful to be here and share space with the 3 of you.
Likewise.
I think that you all have blessed the city. I know this is recorded. You all have blessed the people that will watch it afterwards. And I challenge all of you to consider that first question I gave in the beginning. Now, so what is yours to do? You've heard from us. You've heard from 3 leaders. My encouragement to you all first is support them. My second encouragement is email them. And the third thing is consider where in our work to represent, to lead, to empower, and to repair the harms of the past and to protect the people of the present, where will we negotiate, but we will not compromise. Thank you all so much.
No.
Uh-oh.
Sit down. All right.
No, when Jackie says no, we stay.
Okay, yeah, for real.
We stay.
Sorry, Jackie. We sorry.
Right here. Yes, ma'am.
So, I don't know why X said yes, ma'am. I mean, no, I'm not at all. Jamal, where are you from?
I'm from Lexington, Kentucky.
Lexington, Kentucky. Okay, welcome to Chicago. So, you know how this is a whole picnic conversation. When the sermon gets real good and you're rocking, and you don't know if you're rocking because it's good or you're rocking because you're stepping on your toes. You understand where I'm going, right? Yeah. Those who don't, we'll explain to you later. It's cultural. When Jamal made the comment that someone mistook him for Jamal Cole, I mean, who among us has not had that happen, right? So I instantly looked over at Francie, who, I don't know if Francie's been in a sermon where she's been rocking like that or not, but she literally was like fuming. Her lips got tight. She was like, have you ever had that? I told you if you don't, again, that's cultural. Yeah, see, it's cultural, yeah. But I get it, right? So there is so much here today. And MB, I know your wheels are already turning. I already know. MB's part of our staff and she does so much of this great work. She and Amanda, I don't know how they do what they do, but they make it happen. So I'll just step out and say, because Amora can do that, right? And Dan will be okay with it, right? You guys are coming back. I don't know how
Appreciate it.
We'll figure it out. Yeah, I got so many notes that I'm not even going to get to all of them, but I will say this. We've made a few changes around here at the City Club of Chicago, and if you haven't noticed it, you see it now. This is what the future of the conversations look like. And I work for a major institution, a major financial institution, and we think we're really doing something. But wow. So in my mind, I think that Tara from MacArthur and Francie and Sarah from Amazon and Joyce Folk and Genesis who's in the back, I'm thinking you guys are going to be running up here to talk to Dion and Jamal and Ashley. And Amanda and MB, when you post this, could you make sure that you post their email, their contact or their website or something so that people can be able to get directly to them? Okay, so they'll make sure that happens because you guys rattled those off. This is what Chicago should look like. This is what the conversations, as painful as sometimes they are, And sometimes they're tough conversations. We have a lot of fun here at the City Club of Chicago. We joke and we laugh, but these tough conversations are where the real work is getting done. And so this should have been one of our not able to move rooms. If you've not been here before, you don't know there are times when I'm sure we have gone beyond the, what's it called, the capacity code? Yeah, you've been in there, right? Where you're like, hi, can I just get to my seat? It's this should have been one of those, but I promise you that number 2 will be Danielle. So however we go about doing it, I don't know. That's not what I do. But I will say thank you to each one of you. And did I shout out Genesis from Greater Chicago Food Depository? So Genesis is like family to me, so she gets a special shout out. Let me just say thank you to each one of you for being here, for taking time for this conversation. This is so important. And these tough facts are what, are what they live with every day. And I know X well enough to know that he's not done with this conversation either. So what I'm gonna say is, okay, I already know that. So what I'm gonna say is, I don't like to say that, we have a monopoly on a whole lot of things around here, but I want this to be City Council's conversation. I want this to continue. It deserves to be continued here. And Dan is not here, he's traveling today, our CEO, but what he would say is, this is where the conversations need to be held. And that's what we try to do. Peggy knows that. This is what we do. And so if I see all of you still talking 10 minutes after the program, that tells me that we had a great program. And I have a feeling that those funders are going to be talking to you all. Because if you don't talk about it, then we don't know about it. Absolutely. So on behalf of the other board members who are not here, I'm not going to ask you to get up. I'm just going to pass you your Jamal.
All right.
Jamyle.
I appreciate y'all.
So you understand how important that is? Culturally,
That's dope.
when you mispronounce a name, that's a whole thing, right? It is. I'm just going to answer the question for you. It's a whole thing, right? That's a big deal. So Jamyle, thank you for correcting me. Yeah, that's a whole, again, you got to come to the picnic to get that. But those are your year membership memberships. Please utilize them. Please come. We're but a phone call away, or you can press the button and register. I will tell you that I've noticed that we have had more and more events where people have not been able to get in. Sorry. Come early to secure a good seat. It's kind of like, Jesus and Mary at the end, they couldn't get in. Okay, that was cultural too. But so maybe that's just Sunday school related. The website that Xavier talked about, givingusa.com, I want to make sure that we share all of that information. You shouldn't have to come and try to remember everything. So our marketing folks will make sure all of that gets out. I am going to ask that, did you always come down?
You got a mic under there.
He said.
There's a mic under there.
Really?
Secret mic. You ain't stopping this.
Come on, the extra.
I knew you were gonna do that.
Well, I hear that a little bit later. I mean, what would you rather hear, my mouth or the fact that just keep me going? They cut me. So the conversation will continue. Please make sure that you the program will be up later today. TW later this afternoon, it'll be live, yeah. So please go back and rewatch it. We will make sure that we tag everything from a marketing perspective. Please don't make this your last time being here. I'm gonna ask you all to stay up here for a quick photo, and then all the people that wanna talk to you will come up, I'm sure. Thank you all so much, and although we're late, we are adjourned.